He was 19 when it happened, a late summer evening in 1995, just as Georgia's humidity began to retreat from its daily high. The call came at home, a drive-by shooting in a quiet suburb, a teenager shot dead, a community shaken. He was at a friend's house, winding down from a day of mowing lawns. He should have been safe. He should have never been in the story. Yet, a month later, he was behind bars, charged with a murder he never committed. The case was built on three kinds of evidence: a shaky eyewitness description, vague footprints found near the scene, and most damning of all, a confession he never made. He was interrogated for 48 hours straight, in rooms that bled into one another, under lights so bright that after a while your eyes stopped working. He was young, scared, exhausted, and confused. They told him if he didn't sign the paperwork, things would get worse. He signed. As he walked into jail in September, he carried a branded orange jumpsuit and a name that had been his since childhood. By the time the trial began, he felt erased. The jury saw a troubled youth. The prosecution saw a confession. There was no DNA. No motive. No bullet with his fingerprints. Yet, 3 hours of jury deliberation later, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. At 20, all his tomorrows were stripped away. The first year in prison was a blur, lockdown lights that never dimmed, an echo of steel gates down every hallway, the permanent weight of a body that wasn't free. But he survived. He learned to walk quietly past the guards, to talk softly around the other inmates. He used to dream about freedom. Over time, those dreams changed. They became routines: waking at 5 a.m., brushing his teeth with ice-cold water, attending classes in the dayroom, reading library books he might never borrow again. He was no longer just surviving. He was learning discipline, not the kind that demands, but the kind that sustains. He earned his GED. Then a writing certificate. Then finished every book on criminal justice he could hold. He figured out what they had taken from him, and he refused to let it survive inside him. He reached 30 without seeing 30. That's when he first heard about DNA, how it had freed the innocent in other high-profile cases. How a single strand of evidence could undo decades of pain. He wrote to the Innocence Project. Twice. The first time was ignored. The second he followed up with a case summary, politely signed. Months passed. Years passed. 11 letters arrived, all returned marked, "Do not release." Because he could be released, but only if someone proved him innocent. He understood the logic, but not the justice. He never gave up. He studied criminology magazines and court rulings by researchers. He passed notes in class about DNA cold cases. He used his certificate to tutor others in math. He learned bench science, not hands-on, but strongly. He memorized steps of an RFLP test, a PCR, an STR profile. He taught himself to trust not hope, but facts. In 2015, his third Innocence Project request finally made it to a lawyer's desk. The letter wasn't long, just his name, his case number, and a plea for reconsideration. Curiosity drew the lawyer in. Inside the file, an untested rape kit and murder scene sample was logged but never analyzed. She wrote back. And that set everything in motion. Retesting took 6 months. He marked September 2016 as the date he'd spend in the yard, staring at oak trees and counting their limbs until the call came. When it did, his voice cracked. The original suspect's DNA matched. There was no trace of his own. He was exonerated in early 2017, 21 years later. He walked free, not with a parade, but with steps he had earned over decades. People asked what he felt inside. He said he wasn't angry. He was reflective. Because his release didn't erase the years that were lost. Memories that were never made. He had lost birthdays, milestones, first loves. But he hadn't lost himself. And that was more profound than freedom. After his release, he sat in the lobby of a courthouse, watching lawyers in suits, families arriving, teens in selfies. Nothing felt ordinary. Everything felt possible. He opened his notebook, the one he used for study. He wrote, "Self-discipline sustained me. Mindfulness freed me." Not as a tagline, but as a truth. Then he met with a group of law students, discussing how to prevent wrongful convictions. He told them the seeds of change are planted when people act before tragedy blooms. That the system Needs everyday discipline, lawyers reading dusty case files, courts logging every sample, detectives measuring every word. That mindfulness in investigation can save lives before injustice destroys them, and he didn't stop there. He became a consultant, not for politicians, not for profit, but for reform. For policies that require mandatory DNA testing in violent crime, preservation of evidence, videotaping interrogations from start to finish. He spoke before state legislatures. He entered alliances with biologists, with investigators, with noble hearts who believed not only in innocence, but in constant vigilance. Through his journey, he became a quiet teacher, how precision in every step, opening a book, sending a petition letter, demanding a test, defines your life. He showed that personal growth isn't about flashy speeches or hashtags. It begins in a cell, with a toothbrush and an unbroken will. A memoir followed. Not page-turner fast, but slow-living honest. Chapters dedicated to people who believed despite everything, to jailers who treated him like a man, to the oak trees he studied in the yard. To the moment he walked free. He didn't say, "I'm back." He said, "I'm here. If you think about priorities, ask this: what are you building quietly in your own life, so that when tragedy comes, or freedom calls, you aren't starting from zero?" He kept walking. Not because he was free, but because he had never stopped. He stepped onto the courthouse steps with a surge of stillness, not triumph, not vengeance, just relief. 2 decades of routine, waking, reading, counting flaws, had trained him to live in the moment. Freedom felt quieter than he expected. It felt real. Weeks passed before he took a flight back home. His mother met him at the airport, tears mixing with laughter. His nieces crowded around, clutching homemade signs, "Welcome home, Uncle." He hugged them in turn, feeling years fold back into one present moment. Then came the work. He wasn't drawn to interviews or contracts. He was drawn to classrooms, to correctional officers, to labs, to committees. He began meeting with detectives, sharing how confession-based investigations can slip, how exhaustion and fear twist truth into paper. He helped train police on reading Miranda rights not just as a formality, but as a shield for justice. He sat with prosecutors, urging them to insist on DNA testing before closing cases, before accepting questionable confessions. He advised defense attorneys on preserving biological evidence, even when juries leaned toward certainty. He testified at a state hearing for a bill requiring automatic DNA submission in violent felony cases. He spoke of numbers: 8% of cases overturned by DNA, 20,000 years of combined wrongful imprisonment, and names, people he'd met in prison who weren't public stories. He told lawmakers, those years are irreplaceable. Their families' wounds are permanent. You have the chance to prevent that. When the bill passed, he didn't celebrate. He just sent a note to his old Innocence Project contact: "We did it." She replied with 2 words: "All you." He started traveling, visiting high schools, community centers, faith groups. He spoke slowly, asking youth to think about the long arc of justice. Your life isn't just what happens to you, but how you choose to protect others from what happened to me. At one school, a student came forward privately, his name withheld. He'd been convicted of a crime before he turned 18 but was exonerated 8 years later. He said that hearing the man who'd lived it open up gave him purpose. Now he was studying forensic science. His lectures weren't motivational, they were invitations to personal growth, to vigilance, to integrity, to the understanding that social discipline, accepting no link in the chain, can prevent injustice. Then, 5 years after his release, he did something he never thought possible. He met the man who had taken the plea deal in the crime for which he was convicted. Not the real perpetrator, but a small-time accomplice who had lied under pressure. Their meeting was silent at first, 2 adults, standing in a quiet room. The accomplice apologized, whispering that he'd always felt the weight of what he'd done. The exoneree listened. He nodded slowly. He closed his eyes and replied, "Holding someone accountable doesn't require me to hold your shame. The truth is enough." Outside, they each went back to their lives. One carrying the weight of truth accepted, and the other carrying the gift of freedom reclaimed. He never wanted to be a hero. He just became one, because someone taught him to fight not for headlines, but for habits, asking questions, safeguarding truth, demanding answers, microscopically, daily. That was the discipline that saved him. Today, he writes essays for legal journals. He visits prisons to teach classes on self-awareness and mental resilience. He gardens quietly at home, knowing that growth, inside us and the world, takes root only when tended with patience. In the end, his message is simple: if injustice can last 20 years, life can last a lifetime. And mindfulness, clarity, and discipline, quietly chosen, fiercely held, are the blueprint. So when life leans on you, what will you build? What habits will stand when your world shifts? Because someday, maybe not today, not tomorrow, but one day, those habits will set you free. And when that day comes, when your truth is finally seen, when your story is finally heard, it won't be your rage or your noise that defines you. It will be your patience, your endurance, your quiet choices stacked, one upon another, across years no one else counted. He understood that more than anyone. Every letter he wrote, every book he studied, every night he sat with his back against a concrete wall, all of it was a form of resistance. A declaration that even in the smallest acts, dignity still lives. He would often say, "They took my time, but not my will. They misjudged me, but I never misjudged myself." Now, he mentors others, those on the edge of collapse, those overwhelmed by unfair systems, those who feel they've been erased. He tells them, you are still the author of your story, even if someone else wrote the first chapter wrong. There's a ripple effect in that kind of thinking. One of his students, a young woman wrongly suspended from school, went on to become a civil rights attorney. Another, a man recently released from a non-violent offense, now trains at-risk youth in trade skills. They say his presence is calm, like a still river after a storm. Not because he ignores the storm, but because he survived it. He doesn't preach about revenge. He speaks about redirection. He reminds people that growth doesn't come from breaking something down, it comes from building something new, habits, courage, and boundaries that serve your values. He believes you can turn pain into presence, anger into action, silence into strategy, and most of all, he teaches that truth isn't just what gets revealed in a courtroom. Truth is what you hold onto when no one is watching, when the door closes, when your name is forgotten, when your voice shakes but doesn't stop. So the next time someone doubts your worth, or dismisses your truth, or asks you to be smaller just to make them comfortable, remember this man. He stood up with no one behind him. He fought with no headlines in front of him, and still, he walked out, stronger, wiser, and free, because his life was not built on what was taken from him. It was built on what he never gave away. He never gave away his belief in justice. Even when it mocked him. He never surrendered his dignity, even when they stripped him of his clothes, his rights, and his freedom. He never let go of his sense of purpose, even when every wall around him tried to convince him that purpose was a luxury reserved for the free. That kind of strength doesn't arrive all at once. It's built. It's built in the mornings when you get out of bed, not because you feel hopeful, but because you refuse to feel hopeless. It's built in the way you speak to others, even your enemies, not with bitterness, but with boundaries. It's built in the way you tell the truth when lying would be easier, in the way you stay calm when fury would be justified, in the way you endure without losing your soul, and eventually, those quiet choices add up. They shape your character in the dark, so that when light finally comes, you don't have to become something new, you just have to step forward and be what you already are. He is that proof that you can be misjudged, silenced, overlooked, and still become the voice others follow. Proof that while systems can break bones, they can't erase what's rooted deep. A mind sharpened by patience, a heart healed by purpose, a soul strengthened by grace. People often ask him if he's angry. If he wakes up at night, fists clenched, thinking of the years lost. He smiles and says something quiet, I don't measure what I've lost. I measure what I'm doing with what's left. And he means it, because his legacy isn't carved in courtroom victories or social media moments. His legacy lives in the men who now question the system instead of blindly accepting it. It lives in the officers who now pause before rushing to judgment. It lives in the lawmakers who finally see the humanity behind the data. It lives in the girl who saw his story on her phone and decided not to give up. It lives in the boy who realized that being disciplined doesn't mean being silent, it means choosing your voice carefully, using it wisely, and never using it to harm. He planted all of that. Not with noise, but with discipline. With focus. With the kind of inner stillness that grows when you stop waiting for permission to become who you already are, and that's the lesson he leaves behind. If you want to change the world, start by mastering yourself. If you want to be heard, learn how to listen. If you want justice, carry it with you, even when no one's watching, because one day, someone will be, and on that day, You'll be ready, and when that day comes, when the world turns its eyes to you, asking silently, how did you make it through? You won't need to shout. You'll speak in steady tones. You'll stand without trembling. You'll walk without needing applause, because your truth won't come from a place of anger. It will come from a place of alignment. You'll know who you are, not because someone else confirmed it, but because you've lived through every effort to deny it, and still stood tall. He teaches that power isn't in the badge, the robe, the podium, or the title. Power is in presence, power is in integrity, power is in the discipline to keep showing up, not for others to admire you, but because you won't abandon yourself. Every time he speaks to someone who's on the verge of giving up, he tells them, don't let someone else's injustice make you unjust. Don't let the pain they caused become the pain you pass on. And they listen, not because his voice is loud, but because it's lived. He never pretends to have all the answers. But he does have a map. And that map is simple: start with silence, build your focus, strengthen your values, and when your moment comes, because it will come, you'll be the kind of person justice can stand behind. One day, a reporter asked him, if you could go back and erase those 20 years, would you? He thought for a long time. Then he said, I wouldn't wish them on anyone. But I wouldn't trade who I became. That's what makes his story different. It's not about what was done to him. It's about what he chose to become despite it, and that choice. That daily, disciplined, defiant choice to rise, again and again, is what makes his life a blueprint, not just a biography. So when you're lost, when the world feels unfair, when your voice shakes and your hands are tired, remember him, not because he was perfect, but because he kept going, because he held on to the smallest flame of truth, until it lit the whole room, and that flame, small, flickering, fragile at times, was never just his. It was the flame lit by every person who came before him, who endured quietly, who were never recorded in textbooks or court transcripts, but who chose the high road when it would have been easier to sink. It was the flame of his grandmother, who taught him that dignity isn't what others give you, it's what you carry even when they try to take it. It was the flame of the friend who believed him when others didn't, who kept writing letters when the world went silent. It was the flame of the stranger who slipped a book into his hands and said, read this. It won't free your body, but it might free your mind. It was the flame of the teacher who told him he mattered, of the mentor who reminded him that worth isn't based on outcome, but on effort, and now, he carries that flame for others, for the teenager feeling invisible in a classroom that never called on him, for the mother navigating systems designed to fail her, but who still shows up, tired, brave, unbroken, for the young man pulled over and questioned, not because of anything he did, but because of how the world saw him before he even spoke. He lights the way with his story, not to center himself, but to show others the road doesn't end in injustice. It bends. It widens. It turns into something new when you choose not to give up, because what they meant to be the end of him became the beginning of someone more powerful, someone who no longer needs a courtroom to validate his truth, someone who no longer needs revenge to feel restored, someone who understands that true justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet walk home, finally free, finally whole, and that is the kind of story that doesn't just settle a case. It awakens a generation. So if you're listening, wondering if your own story is worth fighting for, it is. If you're wondering whether growth is possible after the worst day of your life, it is. If you're asking whether the quiet path of grace, of focus, of self-respect is still powerful in a noisy world, it is. Let this be your reminder: you don't have to be perfect to be worthy, you don't have to be loud to be heard, you don't have to be free to choose freedom, and you don't have to wait for the world to give you justice, because living justly isn't just about the big courtroom wins or the headlines that flash across screens for a few days. Living justly is about how you carry yourself when no one's watching. It's about how you speak when you're angry, how you act when you're afraid, and how you love even when you've been wrong. That's what he teaches now, not in lecture halls, not on stages, but in quiet conversations with those who need it most. In prison outreach programs, where he sits with young men whose lives feel like they are over before they began, and tells them, you still have a choice. In schools, where he talks to kids who've already been labeled problems and reminds them that labels can't define who you decide to become. In courtrooms, where he stands beside those falsely accused and offers the one thing they thought they'd lost, hope, and maybe most importantly, in his own home, where he raises his children not to fear the world, but to be ready for it, to walk through it with eyes open and a spine straight. To know that even when life feels unfair, they are never powerless, because power isn't about control. It's about courage, the courage to stand up when it's easier to sit, the courage to speak truth when it would be safer to stay silent, the courage to keep going when you have every reason not to. And this man, once just another name in a forgotten file, once a statistic in a system designed to crush him, is now a guidepost for so many, not because of what he lost, but because of what he chose to build with what remained. So if you've ever been overlooked, if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told to sit down, be quiet, stop dreaming, you don't need permission to become who you were meant to be. You only need a reason, and if no one's ever told you this before, you are reason enough. Let his story be proof that healing is possible, that discipline is louder than rage, that purpose outlasts pain, and that the truth, your truth, when carried with courage and grace, will always find its way to light, because truth, no matter how deeply buried or how long denied, has a way of rising. It rises in the silence after a lie is told, lingering in the space between what was said and what was felt. It rises in the steady gaze of someone who's seen too much but still believes in something better, and it rises in stories like his, where the journey to justice wasn't a straight line, but a maze of broken systems, betrayal, and quiet resilience. He didn't rush to forgiveness, but he also didn't build a home in bitterness. He understood that pain, if left unprocessed, becomes a chain. But if faced with honesty and courage, it becomes a torch, and now, he carries that torch, not just for himself, but for those still in the dark. He reminds us that it's not the job title that makes a leader, nor the uniform that makes a protector, nor the robe that makes someone righteous. It's the choices, daily, quiet, often unseen choices. To show up. To be kind. To speak truth, even when your voice trembles. To wait with dignity when others demand you break. To hold your values like armor, not to harm, but to protect the humanity in yourself and others. In every talk he gives, every letter he writes, every hand he holds, he shares the same message: you are more than what they called you. You are more than what they did to you. And you are never too broken to begin again. That message lives in his walk, in his words, in his wounds, and it lives in the people who hear him and decide that today, they won't give up, that today they'll take one step, just one, toward healing, because justice isn't just a verdict. Justice is how we treat each other when no one's watching. It's how we speak to the people who can't give us anything. It's how we carry pain without passing it on, and it's how we choose to live, not in reaction to the world's cruelty, but in reflection of our own deepest values. He is living proof that what breaks you doesn't have to define you. It can refine you. It can shape you. It can prepare you to become the kind of person who doesn't just survive hardship, but transforms it into a pathway for others. So when you find yourself standing at the edge of despair, wondering if anything good can come from what you've been through, remember this: yes, it can, and yes, you can, because what he learned, what he earned, was something no institution could grant and no injustice could erase: an unshakable sense of self, not the self defined by circumstance, not the self others tried to reduce to a file number or a cell block, but the self that endures when everything else is stripped away. And in that stillness, he discovered the kind of power most people spend their whole lives chasing: quiet, unwavering, rooted not in control, but in clarity, clarity that said, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to do with it. And so he chose, again and again, to respond with purpose. To trade rage for resolve. To turn humiliation into humility. To use his voice not to shout back, but to speak forward, and people listened, because his story was no longer just his. It belonged to every person who had been silenced and shamed, and still decided to stand. It belonged to the janitor who gets overlooked, but shows up early and leaves late. To the young girl who speaks up in class even after being told she's too loud. To the single mother who gets judged in courtrooms but keeps fighting for her child's dignity. To the man who spent half his life behind bars for a crime he didn't commit, and walks out, not to seek revenge, but to rebuild. This story is their story. It's your story. It's the story of what happens when someone refuses to be broken by a world built on breaking people. He says now that justice, real justice, starts small. In the words you choose when you're angry. In the breath you take before reacting. In the decision to show up, clear, focused, grounded, even when everything in you wants to run. That's how you take back your life, not all at once, but one choice at a time, and over time, those choices stack, they build strength, they build vision, they build a new kind of legacy, not carved in stone, but etched in the lives of those you lift up along the way. So, if you've been hurt, If you've been fired for telling the truth, mistreated for looking different, discarded for being difficult, or punished simply for existing in a world that wasn't ready for your light, don't dim it, channel it, shape it, shine it into every room that tried to keep you out, because the world doesn't just need more noise. It needs more clarity, more people like you, quietly, steadily, unapologetically being the kind of justice that can't be ruled against, and in doing so, you'll become more than what was taken from you. You'll become a mirror for others to see what's possible. A bridge over the pain they thought they'd never cross, and a reminder that even after everything, you still get to decide who you are, and deciding who you are, really deciding, is the most radical act of self-discipline there is, because it means not letting bitterness write your future. It means holding your head high in rooms where they once tried to shrink you. It means healing on your own terms. Not just to move on, but to move forward with purpose. He didn't choose the easy path. He chose the right one. And that made all the difference. He could have disappeared into the background, let the years of false imprisonment, lost wages, broken relationships, and public humiliation consume him, but instead, he walked out of that courtroom not just free, but transformed. He walked out not with vengeance, but with vision, not with a need to destroy the system, but a fire to rebuild it. And how did he begin? With conversations. He spoke to law students about what justice feels like when it fails. He spoke to police cadets about how fear and bias can't coexist with integrity. He spoke to high school kids, some already hardened by the world, and told them, you matter. Don't wait for someone else to tell you that. Believe it. Act like it. And in those moments, the system began to shift, not by force, but by truth, not by riots, but by revelations, and the most powerful revelation of all. That dignity, real dignity, is not something the world hands you when you're lucky. It's something you claim when you're ready. And now, he reminds everyone he meets, you are not your mistakes, you are not their assumptions, you are not their labels, their verdicts, or their silence. You are your choices, you are your courage, you are your compassion, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard, because anyone can scream, anyone can blame, but few can stand in the ashes of what was done to them and say, I'm still here, and I'm building something better. He is one of those few, and so are you, if you choose to be. So take this story not just as inspiration, but as instruction. Let it be your mirror, your challenge, your quiet push forward, because the world needs people who've been through something, people who faced injustice, but didn't let it deform them, people who know pain, and still choose peace. That's where the real change begins, not in headlines, not in court rulings, but in everyday people like you, deciding that your story isn't over. In fact, it's only just beginning, and beginnings, true beginnings, don't always come with fireworks or fanfare. Sometimes they come quietly, after everything has fallen apart. They come in the silence of your room, long after the applause ends and the cameras shut off. They come in the stillness, when you're left alone with your thoughts, asking, what now? That's where he found his new beginning, not in some dramatic courtroom victory, but in the moment he looked at himself in the mirror and saw more than what the world had tried to erase. He saw the man beneath the story. A man who still had work to do. A man who still had something to give. He started small, volunteering at community centers, mentoring youth who saw the same traps he once fell into, not because he wanted recognition, but because he remembered what it felt like to be invisible. He showed up, not as a savior, but as a mirror. A living reminder that survival is possible, that healing is real, that justice isn't just something you demand, it's something you practice every day. In every interaction, and slowly, something extraordinary happened. The community began to shift, not because of some sweeping reform bill or overnight miracle, but because people saw what resilience looked like in human form. They saw someone who refused to be bitter, who refused to be small, who refused to let pain be his legacy. He built relationships with people who once ignored him. He worked with officers who admitted they had once looked the other way. He sat across from judges and policymakers who were finally ready to listen. And he didn't waste a single opportunity, not to shame, not to scold, but to teach. He said, if you really want justice, stop waiting for it to be delivered. Start living it. Justice isn't what happens in court. It's what happens in conversation, in hiring, in schools, in the way we look at one another. Really look and ask ourselves, what story am I telling in my head about this person? And is it true? That's how change takes root, not by force. By awareness. By choosing, day after day, to do better. To be better, and through it all, he never stopped growing. He learned to forgive those who never apologized. He let go of the need to prove anything to people who were never listening. He stopped measuring his worth by what had been taken from him and started measuring it by what he chose to give. Because in the end, that's what matters, not the verdicts, not the settlements, but who you become on the other side of your pain. Do you carry it like armor, or do you transform it into light? He chose light, and that light became a path, not just for him, but for all of us. And that path, lit by hard-won wisdom and unwavering resolve, became something bigger than one man's story. It became a movement, not the kind with headlines and slogans, but the quiet kind that ripples through everyday lives. The kind that changes how a teacher sees a troubled student, how a manager hears a difficult employee, how a parent speaks to a child when frustration rises, because that's where real justice lives, in the unseen choices. He never claimed to be a hero. In fact, he often said, "I'm not the exception. I'm the evidence." The evidence that people can grow, that systems can change, that pain can produce something holy if you let it. What they did to him was wrong, but what he did with it, that's where the story lives. He wrote books, not bestsellers, but honest ones. He gave talks, not to impress, but to express. He sat with people from all walks of life, CEOs, janitors, activists, and skeptics, and asked one question: what do you want your pain to teach you? That's what he had asked himself every day in prison. That's what carried him through the darkest nights, when anger whispered, "Burn it all down." Instead, he built trust with those who didn't deserve it, and boundaries for those who abused it. He built bridges across politics, class, and race, not to make peace easy, but to make peace possible. He built a new relationship with himself, not based on what he lost, but on what he chose to become, and that choice, over and over again, made him powerful, not powerful in the way the world usually defines it, with money or titles, but powerful in a way that no one could take away, clear. Grounded, whole, because power, real power, is the ability to respond instead of react. Choose instead of collapse. Be rooted when everything around you shakes. And so now, when people ask him how he survived, how he made it through 20 years of wrongful incarceration and came out not just sane, but strong, he smiles. And he says, "I stopped waiting for the world to be fair. I started deciding who I was going to be anyway." That's what he wants for you, not just to be inspired, but to wake up. Remember that your life is yours, that your story, no matter how messy, painful, or unfair, is not over. And that every moment is an invitation to choose something deeper than resentment, something richer than revenge, something more lasting than being right, because in the end, justice isn't just a destination. It's a way of being, and when you carry that within you, when you embody it in how you live, speak, and serve, you become part of the healing the world desperately needs. So whatever you've been through, whatever they did to you, whatever you lost or endured or still carry like a shadow on your back, know this: you are not broken, you are being refined, and your story, like his, isn't just about surviving. It's about becoming the kind of person who reminds others what's possible, even when it seems impossible, especially then, and maybe, just maybe, that's the quiet revolution the world has been waiting for, not one built on anger, though anger is justified. Not one built on shame, though shame has often been the weapon used against us, but a revolution rooted in clarity, the clarity that comes when you finally decide that your worth was never theirs to measure. He understood this. He had sat in too many cells, heard too many apologies that came too late, or never came at all, to expect closure from the people who caused the pain. So he created his own, not by forgetting, but by remembering with purpose. He remembered the first time he was handcuffed for something he didn't do, and used that memory to train young men how to survive, how to speak, how to stay alive. He remembered the first time his name was dragged through headlines, and used that experience to teach journalists how stories, told carelessly, can destroy a life. He remembered every betrayal, every silence, every time someone looked away, and still chose to look people in the eye when they came to him for guidance. Because he had nothing left to prove, his existence, dignified, determined, deeply rooted in love, was the proof. The world had told him to stay broken, but he didn't, and neither should you. You might not have faced a wrongful conviction, but maybe you've been misunderstood, judged, overlooked, told your truth was too much, your voice too loud, your dreams too big. Maybe you've had to carry yourself through storms no one else saw, smile when it hurt, stand when it would have been easier to sink. This story is for you. Because his freedom, true freedom, wasn't when the prison doors opened. It was when he realized that no one else could define him, and the same is true for you. You get to define what this moment means. You get to choose what happens next. You don't have to wait for justice to begin living justly. You don't have to wait for an apology to start healing. You don't have to wait for anyone else to believe in you before you believe in yourself. Start now. Start where you are. Start with whatever truth you're holding in your chest. And when the voices come, the ones that say you're not ready, not enough, not capable, remember his story. Remember that the systems failed him, but he didn't fail himself, and that made all the difference. He walked through fire and chose not to burn, but to shine. So can you let that be your legacy? Not that you were untouched by pain, but that pain never had the final word. That you grew wiser, stronger, and more compassionate, not in spite of the hardship, but because of how you walked through it. Let your story remind others, the worst day of your life does not define you. What you do with it does, and what you do with it can echo far beyond what you'll ever see. Because healing is contagious. When one person breaks a cycle, when one person decides to forgive without forgetting, to rebuild without resentment, to rise without stepping on others, it gives permission to everyone around them to do the same. That's what he became, permission to grieve without guilt. To grow without shame. To speak without apology. To exist without needing to justify every breath. People started to follow not because he shouted the loudest, but because he lived the deepest. And depth is magnetic. It draws others in, not to worship, but to remember what's already within themselves. People came to him for advice, but they left with something better, clarity. They came asking, how do I fix the world? And he'd say gently, start by being honest about how the world has shaped you. Start by sitting with your own discomfort long enough to learn what it's trying to teach. He didn't offer easy answers. He offered better questions, and in those questions, people found their own strength, because the truth is, no court ruling, no viral headline, no social movement will ever change the world as powerfully as a single person choosing to live with integrity, every day, in all the small, invisible ways. That's what he taught us, not with a megaphone, with his life. He turned his suffering into a lantern for others, and every person who saw that light, really saw it, carried a little of it forward. Maybe you're holding part of it now, maybe you're realizing, even as you listen to this, that your own pain isn't pointless. That your anger, your tears, your silence, they've all been trying to tell you something important, something sacred, that your story matters, that what happened to you wasn't the end, it was the invitation to stop shrinking. To stop waiting. To stop pretending you're fine when you're not, and to begin again, begin messy, begin with your voice shaking, begin with your hands still trembling, but begin, because that's how every transformation starts, not when the world is ready, but when you are. And you don't have to be fearless, you just have to be faithful to the truth, to your values, to your voice. That's what he was, not perfect, but faithful, and in the end, that faith in his own worth, in justice, in people's capacity to grow, that faith changed everything. So here's your reminder, spoken gently but clearly, you are not your worst day, you are not their opinion, you are not what was done to you, you are the story that continues, the light that persists, the proof that even in a broken world, beauty can still rise. And you don't need anyone's permission to walk that path. It's yours, always has been, and now, it's time to walk it with your head high, your heart open, and your purpose clear, because someone, somewhere, is waiting to hear your story next. Let it be one worth telling.